everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Behind the thick walls and rusted bars of a prison, it's easy to imagine the weight of what's been left behind. Desperation, regret, violence, suffering. Some say those emotions fade when the inmates are gone, that once a sentence is served, the slate is wiped clean. But what if it's not? What if something lingers, unseen, unspoken, and deeply unsettled? Shadows that move without form, footsteps in empty corridors, a voice from a cell that's been unoccupied for decades, in places where time crawls and pain runs deep. It's no wonder some things refuse to leave, or perhaps they can't. Tonight, we step into the places most people try to forget, where what's been locked away might not be behind bars, but just out of sight. So, let's get started, shall we? I've worked in prisons most of my life, and I've shared quite a few stories on here, but this story is from the locksmith I used to work with. What most people don't know about prisons is that they normally have a lot of support personnel and additional features that most never see. This story involves both. Normally, the first thing that gets built in every prison, along with the foundation, is the tunnel system. This has been the case even back into the 1800s, given the fact that my old prison had its running under the whole place. What the original purpose was back then, I don't know, but now they're used as emergency escape during a critical incident and for critical systems access. The maintenance staff at prisons are very diverse in specialties, from heating and cooling technicians to electricians to locksmiths. As the place relies on locks to keep prisoners in the facility, you can imagine the facility locksmith is normally busy. The story. Bob had just finished fixing the holding module's lock for the third time this month. The repeated use of the lock caused it to fill with metal shavings that would eventually jam the mechanism, and he would need to swap it out with a spare and repair it once it was removed. The toolkit gripped in one hand and the lock in the other, Bob proceeded down the secured stairwell that led to his lock shop, next to the facility arsenal. Reaching the bottom of the stairwell, he set the lock on his toolbox while he struggled with his keys to find the proper one to open the door, the one that allowed him into the hallway. Struggling with the door, which was assisted closed with considerable weight, he finally managed to open the door and walked through. The hallway was dimly lit, more out of expense than function, and it linked the arsenal, lock shop, and emergency tunnels with the emergency exits. The exits were linked to the arsenal and lock shop directly to allow immediate exit to the tunnels, and had a simple metal gate with an oval diamond pattern that allowed you to see through it. 15 feet past the door of the tunnel, the lighting became so bad you could barely see anything. Bob waited for the door to shut all the way, looking at it as it did until he heard the audible click. Then he checked to make sure that it was secure by testing the handle and pushing against the door. Finding it secure, he turned and began to cross the hallway to his lock shop door. When the damaged lock tumbled off the toolbox and clattered onto the concrete floor with a loud, ringing clang, it reverberated through the hallway down the open tunnel. Shaking his head at how forgetful he was being, Bob bent at his waist to pick up the lock. Grabbing the lock with his free hand and rising, he found himself standing only 5 feet from the gate that stood at the front of the tunnel. As he looked up from the lock he had just recovered, he saw what looked initially like a swinging maintenance light. The tools were used frequently down in the tunnels, the catwalks around the whole prison. It was cheaper to give everyone in maintenance a portable light that attached to the electrical outlets. cheaper than putting a proper lighting system in every nook and cranny. Looking closer and approaching the gate, he realized that it was not a maintenance light. The light was orange like a flame, not yellow like their maintenance lights. As Bob looked closer, shielding his eyes from the nearby ceiling light, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dark, as he thought he'd heard the creaking sound of a metal hinge echoing in the distance. Thinking that possibly something may have broken loose down in the tunnel, he set down his toolkit and the lock as he began to grab for his keys, still looking down the tunnel. As he found the key to the gate, Bob realized that he could see a figure down by the light. Breathing a sigh of relief, he began to take a deep breath to yell to the other maintenance man down the tunnel, but he stopped short as he got a clear look at him. The light wasn't an open flame or a maintenance light. It was an old 1800s-style lantern, and it seemed to move in time with the metallic hinge creaking sound. The man holding the lantern appeared to be very white, wearing striped clothing. Backing away from the gate in shock, Bob watched the figure fade away, like a fog lifting off of the ground when the sun rises. Just a note that prisoners in Michigan Department of Corrections wear blue and orange uniforms that are styled with primary blue, trimmed and numbered in orange. The prisoners have not worn striped uniforms since the early 1900s. I don't know if what I saw qualifies as a ghost, but it definitely wasn't anything I can explain, and I've never forgotten it. This happened a few years back when I was working the midnight shift at a correctional facility. Most nights were quiet, boring even. You spent a lot of time walking tiers, checking cells, making sure no one's where they shouldn't be. It gets repetitive, and after a while, you get used to the stillness of 2 or 3 a.m. It's usually the calmest time of night, but not that night. It was around 2 a.m. I was doing my usual walkthrough, about to hit one of the checkpoints on my round. I'd stepped into the tier when I noticed something at cell 12. Movement. At first, I thought it was just an inmate reaching out to get my attention. Pretty common, especially if someone wants meds or has a grievance. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The hand that was reaching out wasn't just waving or tapping the bars. It was still. Too still. Pale, long fingers stretched out through the bars like it was waiting for something. I slowed my pace, watching it as I moved down the tier. Then the arm started to extend. Not in the normal way, like someone leaning further out. This was unnatural. The arm elongated, like it wasn't attached to bones or muscle. It just kept stretching. Silently, until it reached the security phone mounted on the wall, at least 10 feet from the cell door. I froze. I was standing there, eyes locked on this thing, trying to make sense of it. My brain just couldn't compute what I was seeing. The way the arm moved was all wrong, and there was no sound, no struggle, just a slow, fluid motion, like watching a shadow glide across the wall. Then, just as slowly, the arm retracted, slid back into the cell. I don't remember feeling scared right away. It was more like complete disbelief, the kind that makes your whole body go cold. And then the fear crept in, slow and heavy. My hands were shaking. I backed away and grabbed my radio. I called into the tactical room and said, "I can't do my tour right now. You're gonna think I've lost it, but I swear I just saw something." There was a short pause, and then my sergeant came over the radio. "You saw the arm, didn't you?" Just like that, calm, certain. And that's when I really lost my grip. I asked him what he meant, and he just said, "Come back to the office." I checked the log. Cell 12 was supposed to be empty. Had been for days. No one assigned, no one scheduled to move in. I walked back down the tier during daylight the next day just to be sure. The cell was locked. Empty. I never got a straight answer about what my sergeant knew. He wouldn't talk about it again after that night, just shrugged it off any time I brought it up. But I know what I saw. There was no inmate in that cell. And that arm, whatever it belonged to, it wasn't human. Not anymore. I work in corrections, and I've had a few experiences that have rubbed me the wrong way, the kind I can't really explain. I'm using a throwaway account, obviously, but I'm a CO in the Deep South, and I just entered my 7th year working in my facility. I've always been semi-religious, but nothing serious, just your typical small-town church kind of thing. However, I work in a big city jail, and I've had some minor things happen over the years that didn't really make me think ghosts. But I guess they're creepy nonetheless, unexplained. The kind of hours and the setting you're working in, it's easy to let your imagination run wild, so I always tried to chalk it up to being a little drowsy or stressed. Some of the small experiences that I've had there include random footsteps from around my control room when all the inmates are locked down. I've heard voices in places that are no longer in use. However, this isn't about any of the minor experiences. It's about this encounter or experience from around a week ago. I've talked to a couple of close friends about it, and some guys at work. We can't seem to figure it out. I've tried to wrap my head around this best I can, but I'm honestly at my wit's end. So I might as well post it on the internet, see what sticks, or if someone could perhaps help me reason with whatever happened. So for context, the floor I work is typically a floor reserved for mid-security violent inmates. This would include robbery suspects, domestic violence, assault. A typical night for me is to come in, lock down all the inmates for the night, and then conduct what we call a standing head count. Basically, I come in and put eyes on every single inmate on the floor. If my roster says I have 170 inmates, I have to physically count 170 inmates. Well, the facility is currently undergoing modernization upgrades. This includes new doors, locks, day space tables, furniture, and most importantly, cameras. On my floor, all pods are full to capacity, except for C block. This pod is currently locked out, meaning no inmates are to be housed in that pod until all the upgrades are done and in place. They've been working on it for about 3 weeks now. They've put all the new doors and locks and cameras. The camera feeds are shown on a small screen inside the control room of the floor, with their security number placed in the bottom right corner of each cell. So I shouldn't have to worry about counting in C block, as there's no inmates in C block. Well, about a week ago, after finishing my head count, I came back to the control room. I did my usual routine, pulled up Chrome and just browsed the internet until I did my hourly check, making sure that nobody'd hurt themselves. Around midnight of 5/2/23, I finished doing another check. I sit down in the control room. As I sit down, I do a quick glance at the screen, one with all the cameras. In C block, cell 4, I swear I saw a person standing in the center of the cell, facing outward toward the door of the cell. I do a double take, of course, and nothing's there. Okay, maybe I saw someone in B standing in their cell, or the camera froze for a second. No big deal. About 30 minutes later, I sit up in my chair as I'm putting my phone down. This time again, I see someone standing in C block, cell 4. This time I know that it's that cell, because I'm looking at the number. The cell door is wide open, as are all the doors in C block, so it's for sure that block and that cell. I full sprint into the block. I look up into cell 4. No one. I begin to think that I'm seeing things or the camera is somehow fucking up. I put in a report to our electronic maintenance department. They say they'll look into it. I come back the next night and the report states that all wiring is fine, that the camera feed is in fact linked to C block cell 4. After going home and thinking about it, I convinced myself that I was wrong somehow, that it was just me being tired. Again, same process comes and goes, lockdown, head count, back to control room to wait. I'm now glancing every once in a while at C block, cell 4. Nothing appears. Midnight comes and goes. I think, okay, yeah, it was me, no big deal. Well, then it's time for me to do my checks again. So I do all of them, sit down in the control room. Again, all the doors in C block are all the way open. These doors are not light, by the way. They're big, metal, heavy doors, 60, 70 pounds. And that's when C block, cell 4, slams shut. Then after it's shut, and now locked, it sounds like it's now starting to be kicked in by a horse. Like someone slammed it shut on the back end of a full-grown horse. I look on the camera screen, and all the cameras in the pod are just blinking on and off. I go to the block, and I'm going up the stairs towards that door. More doors start to shut. From 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. At this point, I'm done. I ran out the block, shut the door, called for a supervisor and maintenance. We checked the footage of the event on the supervisor's computer in his office, and of course, none of them show anything. At around the 1 a.m. mark, they just all go to no connection with our local server at the headquarter building across the street. Maintenance did say that it was definitely not the lock, but also said it did look like someone had tried to kick that door off of its hinges, because the door frame itself had chipped paint, and having just freshly been painted, this was obvious. I've scoured incident reports back 5 years. I can't find anything about any violent deaths or anyone dying in general on this floor. That being said, my department has sealed records for the past where if you're under lieutenant, you won't be able to read the report. So I'm not sure. I'm still working on this floor. They're on the last few days of fixing up C block and then they'll move to D block. They still have 3 more blocks after D to do, so I'm a little concerned of what'll happen once those are empty and not in use. Things in C block seem to have calmed down as far as major. Nothing's happened in the last week. Doors still move, and I've had 2 shut, but not like that night a week ago. I've put in for a vacation toward the end of May, so I'm hoping to take some time away and that'll help. Hopefully, it'll be fixed. But this has turned me from a bit of a non-believer to a skeptic. Maybe even on the low end of a believer, or the high end. I just don't think that an AC could blow a 60-pound door shut, or multiple, nor could it cause the door to be hit that violently. If anyone has had a similar experience, or has ideas, I'd love to know. I wasn't a correctional officer, but I did spend some time in prison, and I had some crazy things happen that still give me chills to this day. I was a bad apple for sure in my younger years, which landed me in jail and eventually prison. Thankfully, I've gotten wiser and more law-abiding since, but during my time of incarceration I had these particular dreams, which always involved the same kid who was always possessed by the end. And the weird part is, I was always fully aware in my dream. Not awake aware, but still in the dream nonetheless. I guess it's like lucid dreaming, except I didn't manifest this kid. He just was there. It's like this kid knew I was aware, and he would talk to me about the most hair-crawling things. He enjoyed the fact that it was scary to me, making me feel like all hope was lost. It was so vivid and real, literally felt like it was more than just a nightmare, and it was repetitive. I never had repetitive dreams before. At times toward the end, I would wake up but couldn't move. I couldn't scream, open my eyes, or anything. I was aware and what felt like fully awake through this whole process. From the dreams, to the conversations, to the paralysis. I finally broke down, told my cellie. He told me that I needed to read the Bible. I needed to pray, and that if it didn't work, then I was screwed. So I did, because at that point I was terrified to even sleep. It was that bad. And being raised a Southern Baptist, this seemed pretty logical. And honestly, it was only after I prayed and put the Bible under my pillow that the nightmares and paralysis stopped. I eventually stopped praying and putting the Bible under my pillow, thinking everything was fine, but I was wrong. It came back stronger and harder, almost like it was angry. The rest of my incarceration, I rarely missed a night of prayer or having my Bible close by while I slept. I don't have any clue what it was or have any explanation for why it happened only during my incarceration, but I do know that that's what made it stop and possibly saved me from going insane. Even if it is all in my head, I'm glad something worked, because those dreams, those experiences, they were worse than my actual time inside. A few years ago, I worked in a military prison. Our hours were 24-hour shifts that consisted of shared downtimes, sleep between that shift. One stays awake for half the time, the other sleeps half, then switches halfway through that night. I've been working at this prison for a while by this point, and I was currently working in our special quarters. Our SQ was just a long loop with all of the cells on the inside of the loop. Every 15 minutes, I have to do a health and comfort check and basically walk by each cell, making sure the inmates are alive, healthy. Every cell has a security light, so even at nighttime, the cells are never truly dark so that we can see inside. One specific inmate I remember was in special quarters because he was mentally not all there. His favorite thing to do was draw, scream all day, pee outside of the cell, and sleep. One day we had to do a cell extraction on him because he was clawing at his gums with his fingernails and using the blood to draw symbols all over the cell walls. Medical was looking at him on the spot while I was going through his cell to check for contraband. Looking through his drawings, he would always make childlike sketches of him playing games with his brother in a creepy shadow silhouette of a person. His name was written over the drawing of himself, his brother's over his, and Dark One over the shadowy one. Cheesy, I know. While looking through the drawings, he looks through the cell doors and says to me, "He doesn't like you being in there." I suddenly felt the hair raise on my arms, and I walked right out. Keep in mind, I'm regularly told this weird stuff by the inmate, and it never bothers me or any seasoned officer, except this one time. Fast forward a couple weeks, it's probably around 2 a.m. I'm fully awake while my partner is asleep. During every 15-minute check, I noticed that every cell's security light was on as normal. Otherwise, I'd have to write a report about it. I was sitting in the little cell that we use for our food for the day, eating, when all of a sudden, I hear this extremely loud screaming. I could not make out what the screaming was or what even language it was, but my arm hairs raised again, and I ran to find the source. Every single inmate was sound asleep, but what caught my attention was the strange inmate's security light was out. There's no way that they would be able to mess with those lights, the way that they're installed. I quickly yelled to the other officers in the other bays if they heard that screaming, thinking maybe it came from one of their bays. Not one of the others heard the screaming. I was the only one. Strange inmate had moved. That cell was empty. Since that day, I always requested to never be posted in there again. Even though it was one of the most sought-after posts, I couldn't do it. In 1973, my dad was charged in a RICO case 2 months before my expected due date. He was sentenced to 10 to 15 years, but got out after 13. It was difficult, to say the least, trying to understand someone as your father when you've only met them on the other side of bulletproof glass. For 13 years, my mom and grandma would drive me up to the prison twice a year, usually around mine and my dad's birthdays, January, August. We'd all sit in a small booth gathered around a large vintage phone receiver. A buzzer would go off and the metal door on the other side of the glass would open. First, my dad would walk in, wearing a green and white jumpsuit, his hands handcuffed in front of him, his feet shackled as well. The silver chains were just long enough for him to walk in uncomfortably short strides. Another chain connected his handcuffs to his feet. There were other families around us doing the same thing in their own booths. All of them had graffiti, names, and symbols scratched into the paint on the tables and walls. The room we were in had a loud atmosphere filled with a collective noise of cries, laughs, and other personal conversations that were all happening simultaneously in that small area. The only way to hear the person talking on the other side was to have your ear pressed up against the receiver. We took turns and passed the phone around to talk to my dad. When it was finally my turn on this particular visit, I was so excited to talk to him, tell him how school was going. I just made the soccer team, and even though I barely knew the man really, it was important to me that I made him proud. I thought maybe he wouldn't go back to jail if he got out and I was a superstar. I think I was 10 around this visit and had no idea what a RICO case was or my dad's involvement. I just knew that he'd made choices that took him from me, and I didn't want it to happen again. I was jealous of the other kids who had dads going to their field trips, picking them up from school. I didn't realize how hurtful it must have been telling him these things. I'm sure he wanted to get out just as bad as I wanted him to. Incarceration of a loved one emotionally and financially poisons a family. The loss of income and stability creates a binding struggle for everyone involved. Granted, it could have been worse. My mom made me go to support groups for incarcerated family members, and I'd hear some of the stories that were all distinctly similar but unique in their own way. The similarities mostly revolved around hurt and grief. Everyone could relate to those feelings and see themselves reflected in the ripple of painful stories. My dad's half Japanese and looks more Asian than American. Before prison, his physical features had never been a focus point for him. He grew up in a small town that didn't segregate culturally. They were all poor, so they all worked together. In prison, it's the opposite. Each race becomes their own gang. Black, white, Mexican. They all had their specific areas and rules of engagement. Then there was the group that my dad linked up with, comprised of a few Asians and Native Americans. They were the nomads of the prison population. They didn't hold businesses like the other groups. None of them moved drugs or other contraband, and therefore, if the group kept their heads down and stayed out of gang politics, for the most part, they could skate through their sentence virtually unnoticed and unscathed. My dad spent most of his days playing chess and reading books. Of his 13 years served, he was only involved in one confrontation, and I'd hear the details years after he got out. But I got to see the aftermath during this phone visit. That day when he was let in, he had a black eye that looked like it had been healing, along with some stitches that split through his eyebrow. When I asked him, he told me that he'd tripped and hit his head on the table. I believed him and quickly moved on to my soccer stories. I'm going on and on about random stuff, as he sat on the other side of the glass with the phone to his ear, after everything I said. But as I'm talking to him, a weird white noise static sound is heard. Both of us hear it. It's a man's voice saying, "Found you." I knew my dad hadn't said it because I was staring right at him when I was talking, and his lips didn't move. The voice was also a lot deeper than his. My dad's eyes opened wide. I could see the full circles of his brown irises. I laughed, thinking the face that he was making was intentional to be funny. I thought the static burst that we'd heard was a silly random interruption, but his expression wasn't satirical. We'd been on the phone for less than a minute when it happened, and then in a very serious tone, he tells me to hand the phone to my mom. When she puts the phone to her ear, my dad tells her something that changes her smile to a stoic stare. Then, after an exchange of I love yous, they both hang up the phone. My dad puts his hands on the glass. We all try to fit our hands in the shape of his before a guard grabs him by the shoulders and leads him away. When he left, my mom quickly gathered our things and told my grandma that we needed to exit immediately. Another lie was thrown my way to mask her manic energy as we walked through the waiting room to the main area and out the door to the parking lot. The whole time, my mom was looking over her shoulder, pushing me in front of her to walk faster. We were practically at a jog by the time we reached the car. The next year, we skipped our visit and wrote him letters instead, and we continued this new tradition until his release. To my dad's credit, when he got out and all the way up to his death last year, nobody could say that he didn't do his best to make up for the first 13 years of my life. He got to watch me graduate and see his grandson born into this world. With the family's support, he was able to become a contributing member of society. He didn't like talking about his time behind bars, and it would be years later, I'm talking past college age, before I heard the story, the reason why we couldn't come back to see him. A few weeks before our scheduled visit was to take place, there had been a new guy transferred over to the unit. This guy, Bigfoot, was easily over 7 feet tall, 300 pounds. He was a bully and a complete psycho who knew how to throw his weight around. He'd tell people that when he got out, he was going to slaughter their families before their release date. He went to the point of researching the inmates that he had issues with so that he could repeat their addresses to them. The man was a menace, and eventually, his attention landed on one of the native guys in the pod. He started using the same tactics and personalized the attacks towards him in an extortion effort. The threats didn't stay focused solely on him, as the guy would verbally assault anyone around the native guy, which included my father. Nobody snitched, and plenty of people had tried to fight him, all of them ending with a vicious hospitalization. Bigfoot had a lawyer that was able to coax a judge into letting him serve the remainder of his sentence closer to home. The next part of this contains graphic content, so skip ahead if you're triggered easily. It was never clarified as to what my dad's actual involvement in this was, or if he even physically took part or just watched out for the guards making their rounds. This is why I've intentionally left out names of any sort. As Bigfoot's aggression builds up, the native guy hatched a plan that involved multiple groups within the prison. All of them hated Bigfoot, even the whites who are affiliated with him. But because of their politics and his pull on the outside, they couldn't do anything within their party. But they agreed not to retaliate and even gave their blessing in the plan. The day arrives and he approached Bigfoot, telling him that he wants to end this, offers a carton of smokes that he had as a payment. He was demanding a pack a week. This carton was going to give him 3 months of peace up front. Bigfoot agrees and follows him into the back of the kitchen area where he says the cartons are stashed. He knocks on the door that leads to the food prep station, and a trustee lets him in. As they're heading toward the walk-in freezer, Bigfoot starts to get suspicious. He stops walking. His intuition was correct, but his fate had already been set in stone the moment he stepped foot into the kitchen. He turned around to see a group of men, silhouetted from the only light that was on, located above the sink near the door. All of them were brandishing their own form of weaponry. As talked about previously amongst them, they all lunged towards him at the same time, attacking and stabbing at the same time. Even their general stabbing directions were discussed, like you aim high, I aim low. But with the amount of sharp metal that was being swung around in the dark, they all wound up with cuts and punches from the coordinated strike. None of them were life-threatening. It was nothing compared to what they did to Bigfoot. Whoever he had transferred to be closer to would have to plan a closed casket funeral the next week because he was left unrecognizable. He put up a fight, and I imagine it being like when the cave people would have to battle giant bear sloths, and before they were able to bring him down, he'd break one of their jaws or knock another one's tooth out. Injuries they'd have to claim happened on the basketball court earlier that day. 6 inmates participated and 2 were convicted for the body destruction and disposal. It would be a full 3 days until some of the body was discovered. They had already been on lockdown since that evening's prisoner count was off, and officers presumed he'd escaped. They'd gathered enough evidence to grab 2 of the men without a shadow of a doubt of their involvement. The following days, while they were all on lockdown, my dad said that he saw Bigfoot looking out the small plate window of his vacant cell. Sometimes he'd be staring right at my dad when he'd see him. Other times he'd be gazing upward with his back to the glass. He'd only be visible for a few seconds before disappearing into the blackened cell, leaving him to question if he was even there to begin with, or was this his eyes trying to make sense of nothingness, creating images that weren't there. He began having nightmares reliving that scene, with different outcomes happening each time. All of these things combined were textbook signs of the brain processing trauma. When the lockdown was lifted, the first thing my dad did was go over to check if the cell he'd been fixated on was actually empty. And it was. He didn't see Bigfoot again after that. He tried to block it all out. The next week we were scheduled to visit, and he was able to hide his anxious misery behind a smile, pretended to be interested in my stories. When our conversation was interrupted by the phone noises, what I heard was a jumble of sound and a voice, but what my dad heard was Bigfoot's voice saying, "Found you." It frightened him in a way nothing else ever had before. It was like venom had constricted his breathing to a shallow push of air on the other side of the line. That's when he told me to give the phone to my mom, and when he got on with her, he told her to get me as far away from that place as possible and don't come back. At the time, I remember it was pretty jarring. I didn't really understand, but I also didn't press the issue too hard, because I generally believed these people had my best interest at heart. And even years later, I think, having heard the voice myself, witnessing my dad's reaction, and then knowing the background of the situation, I don't blame my dad for making us leave. And I think my mom did right keeping us away. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining me, whether it's your first time or you're a regular. Your support means the world. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night. Keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos. And of course, subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members: Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T COLTDADDY Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, Kari Watkins, Pilar TREDEN WIXSON, Larry Hill, Ripley, JOJO STARCHER, Mary Patrick, Debbie LaFreniere, Julie Bourdelais, Jennifer BECK, and Marina LACHNER. A big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons: Tracy S, Mary H, Tanya F, Tamara K, Monica L, ZoeWatt, Chelle B, Donald C, Marion T, Rat Girl, Alicia S, Aaron G, Nikki H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendan G, Paul T, Nicholas C, Tony P, Lizanne, Arlene F, Adrian, TF Parham, Jason G, Lori T, and Bobo Jenkins. If you want to support the Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon or becoming a channel member. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.